Walter. I don't pay people to give me excuses.
I am very sorry, ma'am. I will work better.
The skyline of Seattle, Washington shimmered beneath a blanket of gray clouds as billionaire entrepreneur Adrian Blackwood, founder and CEO of Blackwood Global Industries, stood silently in his office overlooking Elliott Bay. At 45, Adrian had built one of America's largest logistics and technology empires from nothing more than his grandfather's small shipping company. To the outside world, he was respected, feared, and admired. Yet one troubling question refused to leave his mind. For months, financial reports from Blackwood Manor, the family's historic estate outside Seattle, had shown irregular expenses. Staff turnover had doubled. Loyal employees who had served the family for decades were suddenly resigning without explanation. His chief of security, Marcus Hale, entered carrying another folder. "Sir, 3 more employees resigned this week." Adrian frowned. Did they give a reason? They all said the same thing. Marcus slid several resignation letters across the desk. The estate no longer feels like home. Silence filled the room. Something wasn't right. His son, Ethan Blackwood, had been traveling across Asia for nearly 2 years negotiating expansion deals, leaving the estate under the management of longtime House Administrator Vivian Mercer. Vivian had worked for the family for almost 15 years. Adrian trusted her. At least,
He used to.
Marcus broke the silence. "Should I send auditors?" Adrian slowly shook his head.
No.
Marcus looked surprised. "If investigators arrive with my name attached, everyone will hide the truth." "What do you intend to do?" Adrian walked toward an old framed photograph hanging on the wall. It showed him as a teenager wearing muddy boots while helping his grandfather rake leaves on their original farm. A smile appeared. "I haven't forgotten where I came from." Marcus immediately understood. "You want to go in yourself." "Exactly." "As who?" Adrian thought for a moment. Then he smiled. "An old groundskeeper." Marcus laughed. "No one would ever recognize America's youngest billionaire looking like that." "They won't." Within 48 hours, Adrian Blackwood disappeared from public view. In his place arrived a gray-haired, slightly stooped old man carrying worn gardening tools. His name, Walter Brooks. No luxury watches. No designer suits. No security detail. Only faded denim overalls, an old straw hat, weathered work boots, and a gentle smile. The gates of Blackwood Manor slowly opened. The elderly groundskeeper stepped inside. No one bowed. No one recognized him. Exactly as planned. Far away, inside the manor's elegant office, Vivian Mercer watched through the window. "So this is the new groundskeeper?" "Yes, ma'am," replied the estate supervisor. "He looks too old." He insisted he could still work. Vivian smirked. "Let's see how long he lasts." Outside, Walter quietly picked up a rake. The owner of the estate had just become its lowest-paid employee, and the people about to mistreat him had no idea they were being watched. The morning fog settled over the sprawling gardens of Blackwood Manor, softening the rows of ancient maple trees and perfectly trimmed hedges. Before sunrise, the estate was already alive with activity. At exactly 5 o'clock, every employee was expected to be at work. No exceptions. Walter Brooks adjusted his faded work gloves and quietly began sweeping the stone pathway leading to the mansion's front entrance. His movements were slow but steady, the kind that came from years of experience rather than youthful speed. He had barely finished one section when a sharp voice shattered the peaceful morning. "Walter." He looked up to see Vivian Mercer walking toward him in a tailored navy coat, holding a clipboard as though she commanded an army instead of a household. "Yes, ma'am. You've been here for almost 20 minutes, and this path is still covered with leaves." Walter glanced at the enormous driveway stretching hundreds of feet toward the entrance. "The wind keeps blowing fresh leaves down, ma'am." "I'll finish shortly." Vivian folded her arms. "I don't pay people to make excuses." "I wasn't making excuses. You just did." Several gardeners nearby lowered their heads, pretending not to listen. Walter simply nodded. "I'll work faster." "You'd better." Vivian turned and walked away without another word. One of the younger gardeners quietly approached Walter after she disappeared. "My name's Liam," he whispered. "Don't take it personally." Walter smiled warmly. "Does she always speak to people like that?" Liam looked around before answering. "Worse." Another groundskeeper, Maria Collins, joined them carrying a watering can. "Careful," she whispered. "If she catches us talking, she'll cut our lunch break." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Surely you're allowed to speak while working." Maria gave a nervous laugh. "Not anymore." The old billionaire listened carefully, without revealing his surprise. "What changed?" Liam sighed. "Everything changed after Mr. Ethan left for overseas." Vivian started making new rules. Maria counted them on her fingers. No sitting unless it's break time. No conversations during work. No questioning instructions. No helping another employee unless she approves. And breaks are only 10 minutes. Walter frowned. 10 minutes. Sometimes less. Before anyone could continue, Vivian's voice echoed across the garden again. "What are all of you doing?" The workers immediately scattered. "I said work, not socialize." Everyone hurried back to their tasks. Walter bent down and continued sweeping. Inside, however, every word was carefully filed away. Later that morning, Walter was assigned to clean the rear courtyard, where deliveries entered the estate. An elderly housekeeper named Helen Foster approached carrying a tray of tea. "You must be tired." Walter smiled. "A little." She discreetly handed him a cup. "Drink before someone sees." "You sound worried." Helen looked toward the mansion windows. "I've worked here for 22 years. And I've never seen the staff this afraid." Walter accepted the tea. "What happened?" Helen hesitated. "People who disagree with Vivian don't stay long. They're fired. Some resign. Others are forced out." Walter remained silent. The estate his family had built on loyalty was now ruled by intimidation. That afternoon, a black luxury SUV rolled through the estate gates. Every employee immediately stopped what they were doing. "Who's arriving?" Walter asked. Liam answered quietly. "Miss Isabella Cross." "The mayor?" "No. Ethan Blackwood's fiancée." Walter carefully watched the vehicle. A beautiful woman stepped out wearing an elegant cream-colored coat and expensive sunglasses. She smiled politely but not at the employees. Vivian hurried outside, her cold expression instantly transformed into warmth. "Isabella, welcome. It's wonderful to see you, Vivian. The house has been prepared exactly the way you like it." "Thank you." Walter noticed something strange. The woman who insulted employees without hesitation suddenly behaved like the perfect hostess. As Isabella entered the mansion, Vivian glanced back toward Walter. "You." "Yes, ma'am. Clean every window facing the front lawn. Today." "Of course. And don't let our guests see you standing around." Walter nodded calmly. "Yes, ma'am." As Vivian disappeared inside, Maria quietly whispered, "Did you see that?" Walter pretended not to understand. "See what?" "She treats Miss Isabella like she's already the lady of the house." Liam added softly, "Some people think Vivian has more influence over Miss Isabella than anyone realizes." Walter looked toward the mansion. "Interesting. Very interesting." That evening, after the workers finished for the day, Walter walked alone through the estate gardens. The grand mansion glowed under golden lights. To everyone else, it looked like a perfect home. But appearances could be deceiving. As he rounded the corner near the west wing, faint voices drifted through an open library window. "Once the wedding happens." Walter stopped. "Everything becomes much easier." He couldn't hear the rest. The voices suddenly fell silent. Someone inside had closed the window. Walter continued walking as though he had heard nothing. But deep inside, his instincts told him one thing. The wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was part of a much bigger plan. A cold rain settled over the hills surrounding Blackwood Manor, leaving the gardens glistening beneath the early morning light. Walter Brooks was already trimming rose bushes when a black sedan quietly rolled through the front gates. The driver stepped out first, opening the rear door. A tall man in a charcoal suit emerged, carrying a leather briefcase. Walter recognized him immediately. It was Daniel Pierce, the chief financial officer of Blackwood Global Industries. Daniel rarely visited the estate. If he was here, it wasn't for a social call. Vivian Mercer hurried down the mansion steps with an unusually warm smile. "Mr. Pierce, welcome. We've been expecting you." Daniel nodded politely. "I need to review some renovation records before Mr. Ethan returns." Everything has been prepared. Walter kept his head down, pretending to prune flowers while carefully watching them disappear into the mansion. Inside the servants' dining room, the atmosphere was tense. "Did you hear?" whispered Helen Foster. "Hear what?" asked Liam. "Mr. Pierce is reviewing the estate accounts." Maria looked hopeful. "Maybe he'll discover what's been happening." Helen quickly shook her head. "I wouldn't count on it."
Why?
"Because Vivian never leaves paperwork lying around." Walter quietly stirred his coffee, without saying a word. Around noon, Vivian stormed into the courtyard. "Walter." "Yes, ma'am?" "The fountain outside the west terrace is filthy. I cleaned it yesterday." "It isn't clean now." Walter walked over. A layer of fresh mud covered the stone edge. He examined it closely. Someone had deliberately scattered dirt into the water only minutes earlier. Vivian crossed her arms. "I suppose you'll blame the wind."
No.
"Then clean it." "Of course." As Walter knelt beside the fountain, he noticed muddy footprints leading away from the terrace. They weren't work boots. They were expensive leather shoes. Interesting. Someone wanted him to fail. Late that afternoon, Daniel Pierce prepared to leave. Before getting into his car, he accidentally dropped a folder near the front steps. Walter picked it up. "Sir." Daniel accepted it with a grateful smile. "Thank you." As the folder briefly opened, Walter caught a glimpse of a financial summary. Several renovation projects listed in the report had never actually taken place. Yet millions of dollars had already been approved. Daniel closed the folder before anyone else noticed. Vivian quickly stepped forward. "I hope everything looks satisfactory." Daniel hesitated. "There are a few numbers I'd like clarified." Vivian's smile remained calm. "I'll send updated records tomorrow." Walter watched carefully. For the first time, Vivian looked nervous. That evening, the employees gathered quietly behind the greenhouse for dinner. Their conversations were little more than whispers. Liam looked toward the mansion. "I miss the old days." "What were they like?" Walter asked. There was laughter. Maria smiled sadly. Mr. Adrian used to know every employee by name. Holidays felt like family gatherings. His son, Ethan, wasn't any different. Walter listened in silence. They treated everyone with respect. Helen sighed. "Now we're afraid to even smile." Walter lowered his eyes. Hearing strangers praise the values he had worked so hard to build reminded him why he had come back. Not simply to expose corruption, but to restore the family his grandfather had created. Near midnight, Walter quietly walked through the gardens carrying a lantern. Officially, he was checking the irrigation system. In reality, he was watching the mansion. As he passed the library windows, faint voices drifted into the cool night air. Vivian Mercer and Isabella Cross. Walter stepped behind a hedge. "You've convinced Ethan about the renovation budget?" Isabella asked. Vivian smiled confidently. "He trusts me." "And after the wedding?" "Things become much easier." "What about Blackwood Global?" Vivian lowered her voice. "Once you're Mrs. Blackwood, you'll have influence over Ethan. And then, we'll slowly redirect investments." "Without anyone noticing?" "They won't." Walter's heartbeat slowed. This was no misunderstanding. It was a calculated plan. Just then, another voice joined them through the partially open window. "Make sure Daniel Pierce never looks too closely at the estate accounts." Walter frowned. That voice didn't belong to Vivian. Nor Isabella. Someone else was involved. Someone inside Blackwood Global Industries. The lights suddenly switched off. The meeting was over. Walter quietly slipped back into the darkness before anyone saw him. As he returned to the gardener's shed, one thought echoed through his mind. The conspiracy was far bigger than he had imagined. It wasn't just about stealing an estate. Someone was reaching for an empire. The following morning, a thick blanket of mist drifted across the lawns of Blackwood Manor, giving the estate an almost peaceful appearance. To outsiders, it looked like paradise. To Adrian Blackwood, living under the name Walter Brooks, it had become the scene of an invisible war. He spent the early hours trimming hedges along the eastern gardens, carefully observing every employee who passed. Some greeted him with quiet smiles. Others kept their heads down, afraid that even a simple greeting might earn Vivian Mercer's disapproval. Fear had become part of the daily routine. That was exactly what troubled Adrian the most. Just after 9 o'clock, an old white maintenance van rolled through the service gate. The words Evergreen Property Maintenance were printed across its side. Walter glanced toward the driver and immediately recognized him. Marcus Hale, disguised as a maintenance technician. Marcus stepped out wearing faded blue coveralls, a baseball cap, and carrying a weathered metal toolbox. To everyone else, he was simply another contractor. Vivian barely looked at him. "You're here to inspect the lighting fixtures?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied professionally. "It shouldn't take more than an hour." "Good," Vivian answered. "Don't interfere with the staff." Marcus nodded politely before making his way toward the service entrance. As he passed Walter, neither man acknowledged the other. Only after several minutes did Walter quietly enter the gardener's shed. Marcus was already waiting inside. The door closed behind them. Marcus placed the toolbox on the wooden workbench and opened it. Instead of electrical tools, the box contained sophisticated surveillance equipment. Miniature microphones, motion-activated cameras, digital recorders, signal transmitters. Walter picked up one device no larger than a shirt button. "Incredible. Our engineers designed it specifically for corporate investigations," Marcus explained. "It records continuously for 48 hours and automatically encrypts every file." Walter turned the tiny recorder over in his hand. "Can it remain hidden?" Marcus smiled. "Unless someone dismantles the chandelier, they'll never find it." Walter looked toward the mansion through the shed window. "Then that's where it belongs." Marcus unfolded a blueprint of Blackwood Manor across the table. "We've monitored everyone's movements." He pointed to one room, the sunroom. Walter studied the floor plan. "Why there?" "Vivian meets Isabella almost every afternoon after lunch. They believe it's the one room where no employees enter without permission." Walter nodded slowly. "Perfect." By midday, Vivian called for Walter. "Walter." "Yes, ma'am?" "The crystal chandelier in the sunroom hasn't been cleaned in weeks." Walter pretended to look surprised. "I'll take care of it immediately. And be careful. It was imported from Italy." Walter smiled politely. "I'll treat it like my own." Vivian stared at him for a moment before walking away, exactly as Marcus had predicted. The elegant sunroom was one of the most beautiful rooms in the mansion. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the gardens. White marble floors reflected sparkling light from the enormous crystal chandelier suspended above the center of the room. Fresh orchids decorated every corner. Walter wheeled in a ladder carrying nothing more than a feather duster and cleaning cloth. Hidden inside his pocket was the recorder. He climbed slowly, carefully polishing each crystal. Halfway through, he discreetly attached the tiny device beneath the chandelier's central bronze frame. Invisible, completely concealed. He had just climbed down when footsteps echoed behind him. "Vivian." "What took so long?" Walter smiled gently. "There are hundreds of crystals, ma'am." She scanned the room suspiciously. "You didn't touch anything else?" "No, ma'am." She stepped closer, inspecting the chandelier herself. Walter remained calm. Several long seconds passed. Finally, she nodded. "You may go." Walter quietly wheeled the ladder away. The first piece of the trap was now in place. That evening, Ethan Blackwood called from Singapore. The entire household became unusually cheerful. Vivian answered the call in the family library using the large wall display. Walter was dusting bookshelves nearby. No one paid attention to the old groundskeeper. "Ethan," Vivian said warmly. "It's wonderful to see you." "Good to see you too, Vivian." Ethan appeared on the massive screen wearing a tailored suit inside a Singapore conference room. "How's everything at the estate?" Vivian smiled confidently. "Everything is running beautifully." "The employees?" "They're happy." "The renovations?" Finished ahead of schedule. Walter quietly lowered his head. Every answer was a lie. Ethan smiled with relief. I'll finally be home next week. We're all looking forward to your return. When the call ended, Vivian whispered to herself, he still trusts me completely. Walter heard every word. The following afternoon, Marcus returned to retrieve the recorder. Later that evening, both men sat inside the gardener's shed. Rain tapped softly against the roof. Marcus connected the recorder to a secure laptop. The first recording began. Vivian's voice filled the room. Once Ethan returns, everything must move quickly. Another voice answered. Isabella Cross. The wedding changes everything. Vivian laughed softly. Exactly. As Mrs. Blackwood, you'll gain access to family discussions. And, eventually, to Blackwood Global. Walter's expression remained calm. Inside, anger slowly grew. The recording continued. What about Adrian? Isabella asked. Vivian dismissed the concern. He hasn't visited this estate in years. He trusts me too much. Both women laughed. Marcus paused the recording. They're becoming careless. Walter nodded. Because they believe no one is listening. Marcus pressed play again. Vivian's voice became quieter. We still need Richard's approval. Walter looked at Marcus. Richard? Marcus frowned. We don't know which Richard. Walter stared thoughtfully at the screen. We will. 2 days later, preparations for Ethan's return intensified. Vivian ordered expensive flowers, new furniture, and elaborate decorations throughout the estate. Every employee rushed to obey. Late that afternoon, Walter was replacing flowers outside the West Terrace when he noticed Isabella arrive earlier than usual. Instead of entering through the front doors, she quietly slipped into Vivian's private office. Curious, Walter moved closer while pretending to trim rose bushes beneath the open window. Inside, Vivian spread several folders across her desk. Everything is almost ready. Isabella nodded nervously. What if Ethan asks questions? He won't. And Adrian? Vivian smiled confidently. He trusts his family. Trust is the easiest thing to manipulate. Walter's hands tightened around the pruning shears. The conversation continued. Once the marriage happens, Vivian whispered, the rest becomes simple. Blackwood Manor first, then Blackwood Global. Walter remained perfectly still. Every word confirmed his growing suspicions. This wasn't merely estate fraud. It was the first stage of a carefully planned takeover of the entire Blackwood empire. As the women left the office, Walter quietly returned to his gardening. Neither of them noticed the old groundskeeper. Neither realized that the man they considered invisible had just heard the conversation that would ultimately destroy their entire plan. That night, Adrian stood alone beneath the towering oak tree overlooking Blackwood Manor. The mansion glowed peacefully beneath the stars. It looked like a family home. But inside, enemies were preparing to steal everything his grandfather had built. Adrian looked toward the illuminated windows and made himself a silent promise. They believe I'm absent. They believe I'm powerless. They believe they've already won. A faint smile crossed his face. They couldn't be more wrong. Three days after Adrian and Marcus recovered the first hidden recordings, preparations at Blackwood Manor reached a fever pitch. Gardeners trimmed every hedge to perfection. Fresh white roses replaced the older flowers lining the front entrance. Housekeepers polished every chandelier until it sparkled like crystal. Luxury vehicles were washed and parked in perfect formation along the circular driveway. Every employee knew one thing. Ethan Blackwood was finally coming home. After nearly 2 years overseeing Blackwood Global Industries' expansion across Asia, the billionaire heir was returning to Seattle. Unlike his father, Ethan had always been close to the estate employees. He remembered birthdays.
He knew gardeners by name.
He often ate lunch with the staff instead of dining alone. Many employees had quietly counted the days until his return. Walter Brooks, Adrian's disguised identity, continued sweeping the front driveway while carefully observing the unusual excitement. Perhaps Ethan's return would change everything. Or perhaps it would give the conspirators exactly what they had been waiting for. Inside the mansion, Vivian Mercer barked orders from one room to another. The flowers in the foyer are unacceptable. Replace them immediately. She turned toward the kitchen staff. The silver service must shine before Mr. Ethan arrives. Then her eyes landed on Walter. You. Walter looked up calmly. Yes, ma'am. The front driveway still has leaves. The wind keeps blowing them back. I don't care. I want every leaf gone before Ethan arrives. Yes, ma'am. She leaned closer. And don't embarrass this estate. Walter simply smiled. I'll do my best. Vivian rolled her eyes before walking away. Maria quietly approached Walter moments later. I don't understand why she treats you like this. Walter continued sweeping. Sometimes people reveal themselves through the way they treat those who can do nothing for them. Maria thought about his words. Little did she know, she was speaking to the owner of the estate. Just before noon, the sound of engines echoed through the entrance gates. A convoy of black luxury SUVs slowly entered the estate. Every employee instinctively lined both sides of the driveway. The lead vehicle stopped in front of the mansion. A chauffeur opened the rear passenger door. Out stepped Ethan Blackwood, 31 years old.
Tall.
Confident. Dressed in a perfectly tailored navy Italian suit. He carried himself with quiet humility rather than arrogance. A warm smile spread across his face as he looked around the estate. It's good to be home. Several long-time employees couldn't hide their emotions. Welcome back, Mr. Blackwood. It's wonderful to see you again, sir. Instead of walking directly into the mansion, Ethan stopped to greet every employee personally. He shook hands with the gardeners, thanked the housekeepers, asked the kitchen staff how they had been. When he reached Walter, he paused. I don't believe we've met. Walter tipped his gardening hat. I'm Walter Brooks, sir. I started working here recently. Ethan smiled warmly and extended his hand. Welcome to Blackwood Manor, Walter. Walter accepted the handshake. Thank you, sir. For a brief moment, father and son looked into each other's eyes. Neither revealed the truth. Neither spoke another word. But Adrian felt proud. Despite everything, Ethan had not changed. He still respected every worker. Vivian quickly approached with a welcoming smile that contrasted sharply with the cold attitude she showed the staff. Ethan, it's wonderful to have you home. Ethan embraced her politely. Thank you for looking after the estate. It's been my honor. Walter quietly lowered his head. He now knew exactly how dishonest those words were. Only moments later, another luxury vehicle arrived. The rear door opened. Isabella Cross stepped out wearing an elegant cream-colored designer dress and diamond jewelry. She hurried toward Ethan. Ethan. He smiled and embraced her warmly. I missed you. I missed you even more. Guests and employees watched the reunion with admiration. Only Walter noticed Vivian exchanging a subtle glance with Isabella. A silent signal. One that spoke louder than words. Later that afternoon, Vivian proudly guided Ethan through the estate. We renovated the West Gardens. She pointed toward newly planted flower beds. We also upgraded the guest wing. Ethan admired the improvements. It looks beautiful. Vivian smiled. We wanted everything to be perfect before your wedding. Walter, quietly trimming hedges nearby, knew much of what Ethan saw had been paid for with fraudulent invoices and stolen estate funds. The beauty surrounding them had been built upon deception. As evening approached, Marcus Hale arrived disguised as a telecommunications technician. He quietly inspected security cameras throughout the property. As he passed Walter near the gardener's shed, he casually handed him a sealed maintenance envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Marcus had identified the mysterious Richard, mentioned in the hidden recordings. Richard Sloan, Executive Vice President of Finance, one of Adrian's most trusted senior executives. Walter stared at the name for several seconds. Richard had worked beside him for over a decade. He had attended family celebrations, shared board meetings, earned Adrian's complete confidence. Now, his name appeared at the center of the conspiracy. The betrayal cut deeper than Adrian expected. That evening, after dinner, Walter quietly watered flowers beneath the library windows. Inside, Vivian, Isabella, and Richard Sloane gathered around a polished oak table. Richard removed several legal folders from his briefcase. The restructuring documents are ready. Isabella looked uneasy. Will Ethan suspect anything? Richard smiled confidently. He trusts me. Vivian folded her arms. And Adrian? Richard laughed softly. Adrian Blackwood believes loyalty lasts forever. Vivian smiled. Then we're almost finished. Richard spread several property maps across the table. Once Ethan signs these after the wedding, ownership of several subsidiaries will quietly transfer to Northbridge Capital. And no one will notice? Richard shook his head. Everything will appear perfectly legal. Walter silently memorized every word. The conspiracy had grown beyond estate fraud. It now threatened the entire Blackwood empire. Later that night, Marcus met Adrian inside the gardener's shed. We have enough evidence to arrest Vivian, Marcus whispered. Adrian slowly shook his head. Not yet. Marcus looked surprised. Why wait? Because Richard isn't acting alone. There are others. We need every name. Marcus nodded. So we let them believe they're winning. Adrian looked toward the brightly lit mansion. The bigger the illusion, the greater the fall. Outside, Blackwood Manor appeared peaceful beneath the moonlight.
Inside,
the final act of the conspiracy had already begun. 3 days after Ethan Blackwood returned to Seattle, Blackwood Manor was once again bustling with preparations. The family's annual charity gala was only a week away, and influential business leaders, politicians, and members of the Blackwood Global Board were expected to attend. Vivian Mercer saw it as the perfect opportunity to strengthen Isabella Cross's image as the future lady of the Blackwood family. To everyone else, it was simply another prestigious event. To Adrian Blackwood, disguised as Walter Brooks, it was the stage where every secret would begin to unravel. Early that morning, Walter quietly swept the front terrace when Richard Sloane's luxury sedan rolled through the estate gates. Richard stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. Vivian greeted him with a warm smile. Everything is almost ready. Richard nodded.
Good.
We don't have much time. Walter kept sweeping while carefully listening. Richard lowered his voice. I've scheduled a board meeting for next Friday. The same day as the charity gala? Vivian asked. Exactly.
Why?
Because Ethan will already be surrounded by trusted directors. After the gala, we'll present the investment documents. And he'll sign them? He won't have any reason not to. Vivian smiled confidently. Excellent. Neither of them noticed Walter quietly collecting every word. Inside the mansion, Ethan reviewed company reports while Isabella joined him with 2 cups of coffee. You've been working since sunrise, she said gently. Ethan smiled. The expansion project can't wait. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. You work too hard. I want everything to be secure before the wedding. Isabella forced a smile. So do I. For a brief moment, guilt flickered across her face, but it disappeared just as quickly. That afternoon, Marcus Hale arrived with new information. Inside the gardener's shed, he spread several documents across the workbench. We've traced the fake renovation payments. Walter examined the records carefully. They passed through 3 shell companies. Marcus pointed to the final transfer. They all lead to the same private investment firm. Walter read the company name. Northbridge Capital Partners. The owner, he asked. Marcus looked up. It isn't Richard Sloane. Walter frowned. Who is it? Marcus slid one final document across the table. The majority shareholder is Vivian Mercer's younger brother, Nathan Mercer. Walter leaned back in silence. So, this has been a family operation all along. Marcus nodded. They've been siphoning money for almost 2 years. And using Blackwood Global's internal approvals to hide everything. Walter folded the documents. The evidence is growing. Later that evening, Vivian called a private meeting in the library. Only Richard Sloane and Isabella attended. Walter quietly polished the brass railing outside the open French doors. Richard removed several folders from his briefcase. These are the final documents. Isabella looked uncertain. Do I really need Ethan to sign all of these? Only the first 3, Richard replied. The rest will be processed automatically. Vivian smiled. And Adrian? Richard chuckled. He still believes the estate is running perfectly. Vivian laughed. By the time he discovers the truth, Blackwood Global will already belong to us. Walter remained expressionless. Inside, however, every word strengthened his resolve. The next morning, another surprise awaited him. Helen Foster quietly approached while carrying fresh linens. Walter. Yes, I found something strange. She looked around to make sure no one was watching before handing him a folded envelope. I discovered this while cleaning Vivian's office. Walter opened it. Inside was a handwritten guest list for the upcoming charity gala. Several names had been circled in red. Board members, legal advisors, investment consultants, every person with authority to approve major company decisions. Walter immediately understood. This isn't a guest list. Helen looked confused. What is it? It's a list of everyone they intend to influence. That evening, Marcus reviewed the new evidence. This is enough to begin criminal proceedings. Walter shook his head. Not yet. Marcus sighed. You always wait, because once we expose them, there will only be one chance. Walter walked toward the cottage window overlooking the illuminated mansion. I want every person involved to reveal themselves willingly, so no innocent employee is ever suspected. Marcus smiled. You've been planning this from the very beginning. Walter nodded. The truth is strongest when people expose themselves. Across the estate, Vivian stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens. She watched the old groundskeeper slowly watering flowers beneath the moonlight. He'll never understand what's happening, she said with a laugh. Richard glanced outside. He's harmless. Isabella remained silent. For reasons she couldn't explain, the elderly groundskeeper's calm eyes made her increasingly uneasy. She had the strange feeling that he saw far more than he ever admitted. As midnight approached, Walter locked the gardener's shed and looked toward the grand mansion. Inside those walls, the conspirators believed they were one signature away from controlling one of America's most powerful companies. They had carefully planned every lie, every forged document, every stolen dollar. What they didn't know was that Adrian Blackwood had already prepared something of his own, a plan that would expose every traitor in a single night. And when the charity gala arrived, no disguise would be necessary. The evening of the Blackwood Foundation Charity Gala had finally arrived. Blackwood Manor had never looked more magnificent. Crystal chandeliers illuminated every ballroom. White roses and orchids decorated the marble staircase. A live orchestra filled the air with elegant music as America's most influential business leaders, investors, politicians, and philanthropists arrived one after another. Luxury cars stretched along the estate's entrance. Television reporters covered the event from outside the gates. To every guest, it was a celebration of generosity. Only Adrian Blackwood knew it was also the night every lie would come to light. Disguised as Walter Brooks, Adrian quietly swept the stone pathway leading to the ballroom. Not a single guest gave the elderly groundskeeper a second glance. Exactly as he expected. Across the courtyard, Marcus Hale approached, dressed as the evening's security coordinator. He stopped beside Walter, without drawing attention. Everything is ready. Walter continued sweeping. The recordings? Downloaded. The financial records? Verified. The witnesses? They're here. Marcus handed Walter a small wireless earpiece hidden inside a folded handkerchief. Every security camera inside the manor is now under our control. Walter nodded. Tonight, no one leaves before the truth comes out. Inside the ballroom, Ethan Blackwood stood on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, thank you for joining us in supporting the Blackwood Foundation. Applause echoed through the room. Standing beside him was Isabella Cross, dressed in a stunning ivory evening gown. She smiled gracefully, accepting compliments from guests who believed she would soon become the future Mrs. Blackwood. Across the room, Vivian Mercer exchanged a discreet glance with Richard Sloane. Richard gave the slightest nod. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. An hour later, after dinner had concluded, Richard approached Ethan carrying a black leather portfolio. "Ethan," he said warmly, "there are a few investment approvals that need your signature before Monday's board meeting." Ethan looked surprised. "Tonight?" Richard smiled. "It'll only take 5 minutes." Vivian stepped closer. "Once these are signed, we'll be completely ready for the wedding." Without suspicion, Ethan accepted the folder. "All right." They made their way toward the estate's private conference room. Walter quietly followed at a distance. Inside the conference room, Richard carefully arranged several documents on the polished mahogany table. "Nothing complicated," he assured Ethan. "Just routine restructuring for several company subsidiaries." Ethan picked up an expensive fountain pen. Just as he was about to sign, the conference room doors slowly opened. Every head turned. Walter Brooks stood quietly in the doorway, still wearing faded overalls, still holding his old gardening hat. Vivian's expression immediately hardened. "What are you doing here?" "This meeting is private." Richard slammed the folder shut. "Security." Marcus Hale entered instead. Behind him came 2 independent forensic accountants, the company's outside legal counsel, and several members of Blackwood Global's audit committee. Richard's confidence instantly disappeared. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus calmly connected a laptop to the room's massive presentation screen. Walter stepped forward. "I believe Mr. Blackwood deserves to know exactly what he's being asked to sign." The lights dimmed. The first video appeared. Vivian's voice echoed throughout the room. "Once Ethan marries Isabella, we'll gain access to Blackwood Global." Silence. The second recording began. Richard Sloane's voice. "By the time Adrian realizes what's happened, the company will already belong to us." The third video appeared. Nathan Mercer, handing envelopes of cash to 2 board members. The room erupted into chaos. One director stood up. "Richard, what is this?" Richard's face turned pale. "I can explain." "No," Marcus replied. "The evidence isn't finished." Financial records filled the screen. Millions of dollars transferred through shell companies. Forged renovation invoices. False vendor contracts. Hidden ownership documents linking Nathan Mercer to Northbridge Capital. Every transaction had been authenticated by independent forensic auditors. There was no room left for denial. Vivian pointed angrily toward Walter. "This old man has been spying on us." Walter looked directly at her.
No.
"I was protecting my family." Vivian laughed nervously. "You, a gardener? You expect anyone to believe that?" Walter slowly removed his gardening gloves. Then his worn straw hat. Next came the gray wig, the artificial beard. Finally, he removed the realistic silicone facial prosthetics that had transformed him into Walter Brooks. Gasps echoed throughout the room. Before them stood not an elderly groundskeeper, but Adrian Blackwood, the billionaire founder and CEO of Blackwood Global Industries. The room fell completely silent. Ethan stared in disbelief. "Dad." Adrian smiled gently. "I'm sorry I had to deceive you." Ethan slowly walked toward him. "It really was you. For 6 weeks." Adrian nodded. "I needed to know who could still be trusted." Vivian staggered backward. "No. This can't be." Richard gripped the edge of the conference table. His hands trembled. Isabella covered her mouth in horror. The man they had mocked, the man they had ordered around, the man they believed was powerless, had been watching them from the very beginning. Adrian faced Vivian. "You called me useless. You called me lazy. You told me I had no right to remain in my own home." Vivian lowered her eyes. But your greatest mistake wasn't insulting an old gardener." He stepped closer. "It was believing that character is measured by appearance." Adrian turned toward Ethan. "The papers Richard wanted you to sign." Marcus projected another document onto the screen. The room gasped again. Had Ethan signed them, control of several Blackwood Global subsidiaries would have quietly shifted to companies secretly owned by Nathan Mercer. Ethan looked at Richard in disbelief. "You were my mentor." Richard couldn't answer. "I trusted you." At that moment, uniformed detectives from the Seattle Financial Crimes Division entered the conference room. "Richard Sloane. Vivian Mercer. Nathan Mercer. You are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement, bribery, and corporate theft. The conspirators stood frozen. Their carefully crafted plan had collapsed in a matter of minutes. As detectives escorted them away, Adrian looked around the room. His voice remained calm. I returned disguised as the lowest employee in this estate because power hides the truth. He looked toward every board member. When people believe you have nothing, they reveal exactly who they are. The room erupted into applause. Not because a billionaire had exposed a conspiracy, but because justice had finally been served.